The confrontation happened in the church parking lot, 20 minutes after the funeral ended. Margaret Sullivan was 62 years old, had just buried her husband of 43 years, and her two sons were trying to sell his tractor before his grave was even filled. "Mum, we need to talk about the farm," her oldest son David said. He was 40 years old, worked as an accountant in Des Moines, hadn't been back to the farm in 6 years, except for holidays. "Mark and I have been discussing it. You can't run this place alone. Dad's gone. You need to sell the equipment, lease out the land, move to town." Margaret was standing by her car in the church parking lot, still wearing her black funeral dress, still holding the folded American flag from Tom's casket. The flag was from his service in Korea 30 years ago. People were walking past, heading to their cars, heading to the community center for the reception, where Margaret's friends had spent the morning preparing food she couldn't eat. "We've already got a buyer lined up for the tractor," Mark added. He was 37, worked in insurance in Cedar Rapids, drove a new Buick that cost more than a year's farm profit. "Guy from Hartman's auction company. He'll give us $8,000 for the Super M. That's fair market value. We can have it picked up Monday morning. Get the money in your account by Wednesday." Margaret looked at her sons, at David in his expensive 3-piece suit that probably cost $600, at Mark checking his Rolex because he wanted to get back to Cedar Rapids by evening, had a golf game tomorrow. At these two men who'd grown up on this farm, who'd eaten meals paid for by that tractor, who were now trying to sell it 3 hours after their father died. "No," Margaret said quietly. "Mum, be reasonable," David said, his voice taking on that condescending tone he used when he thought someone was being difficult. "You're 62 years old. You can't farm 320 acres alone. You don't know how to run the equipment. You've never driven a tractor in your life. This isn't realistic." "Your father taught me," Margaret said, still quiet, still calm. "Last year, when the diagnosis came, he taught me everything." Both sons stared at her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then David, "What are you talking about?" "He knew this was coming. Knew I'd be alone, so he taught me how to farm, how to drive the tractor, how to maintain it, how to plant, cultivate, harvest, everything. I've been learning for 8 months. David's face flushed red, the way it always did when he was angry. "Mom, that's ridiculous. You can't farm. You're a woman. You're 62 years old. Farming is hard physical work. You'll kill yourself trying. Dad should have known better than to put these ideas in your head." "Maybe," Margaret said, "but I'm not selling the equipment. I'm not leasing the land. I'm farming it myself." "You'll fail," Mark said flatly, with the certainty of someone who'd never farmed a day in his life but was confident in his assessment anyway. "Within a year, you'll be broke and we'll have to bail you out financially. Just sell now, while the equipment still has value. Take the money, move to town, live comfortably." "That's the smart move." Margaret looked at her sons, really looked at them, saw the certainty in their eyes that she couldn't do this, saw the eagerness to liquidate everything Tom had built over 36 years of farming, saw that they'd already spent the money in their minds, already calculated their inheritance. "The equipment isn't for sale. The land isn't for lease. I'm farming. That's final." She got in her 1979 Ford LTD and drove to the community center, leaving her sons standing in the parking lot next to their expensive cars, looking stunned that their mother had just defied them. To understand how Margaret Sullivan ended up in that parking lot, defying her sons and committing to farm alone at 62, you have to go back to March of 1983, 8 months before Tom died. Tom and Margaret Sullivan had been farming 320 acres in Tama County, Iowa, since they bought the land in 1970. It was good land, black soil, mostly flat corn and soybeans. Tom handled the field work, the planting, cultivating, harvesting, equipment maintenance. Margaret handled everything else, The books, the household, the meal planning, the garden, the endless logistics of keeping a farm running. It was a traditional division of labor. Tom never thought to ask Margaret to learn the machinery. Margaret never thought to ask. In March of 1983, Tom went to the doctor for what he thought was persistent indigestion. Came home 3 hours later with a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. Stage 3, inoperable. The doctor had been blunt, maybe a year to live, probably less. 6 to 9 months if they were being realistic. Tom was 64 years old that March. He'd been farming since he came back from Korea in 1953, 30 years of working land. The 320 acres were paid off, had been since 1978, 5 years of being completely debt-free. The equipment was old but functional, a 1956 Farmall Super M, a 1968 John Deere 4020, a 1972 International Combine. Everything paid for, no debt anywhere. Their 2 sons had left farming years ago, had made that clear early. David went to Iowa State, got an accounting degree, moved to Des Moines in 1967, married a city girl, had 2 kids who'd never stepped foot on a farm. Mark went into insurance, lived in Cedar Rapids. Same story. Both had good jobs, comfortable lives, zero interest in farming. Tom and Margaret had accepted this reality. The farm would end with them. That was just how it was. 2 days after the diagnosis, after the shock had worn off slightly, Tom and Margaret were sitting at their kitchen table. It was evening, dishes done, sun setting over their fields. Tom said, "I need to teach you how to farm." Margaret looked at him, not sure she'd heard right. "What?" "I'm dying. Doctor says 6 to 9 months. Probably won't make it past next spring. You'll be alone. The boys won't come back. They've made their lives in the city. They'll want you to sell everything, move to town, liquidate. But Margaret, this farm is your security. It's paid for, 320 acres, all free and clear. You rent it out to a neighbor, you'll get maybe $200 an acre gross. That's $64,000 a year, probably $48,000 net, after expenses and taxes. That's decent." He paused, took a breath. "But if you farm it yourself, you'll net 80, 90, maybe 100,000 in a good year. That's the difference between comfortable and wealthy. And you're only 62. You've got 20, 25 years left. That's $2 million difference over your lifetime if you farm versus rent." "Tom, I don't know anything about farming. I've never even driven the tractor. I know, that's why I'm going to teach you. We've got 8 months, maybe a year. That's enough time if we start now." So they started. The next morning, Tom took Margaret out to the machine shed, walked her through the 1956 Farmall Super M, showed her the controls, the clutch, the throttle, the brake, the hydraulic lever, the PTO engagement, explained what each did. "Start with the basics," Tom said. "Just starting and stopping, just learning how the machine feels." Margaret was terrified. The tractor was huge, intimidating, dangerous. The steering wheel was massive. The seat was high off the ground. The controls were unfamiliar, but Tom was patient, and Margaret trusted him completely. She stalled it 6 times trying to get it moving. Tom just smiled and said, "I stalled it 20 times my first day in 1953. You're doing fine." Yeah. By the end of that first day, Margaret could start the tractor, drive it in a straight line, turn it, stop it. Not smoothly, not confidently, but she could do it. By May, after 2 months of daily practice, Margaret could drive the tractor around the farmyard, could back up a wagon, could navigate around obstacles. Tom pushed her gently, never too fast, always encouraging. By June, she was helping with cultivation. Tom would take one row, Margaret would take another, working side by side through the corn. Margaret learned how to watch the rows, how to maintain spacing, how to keep the cultivator shanks at the right depth, how to work the equipment without damaging the crop. Tom taught her maintenance, how to change oil, drain it hot, refill to the proper level, how to grease every fitting, and there were dozens of them, each needing attention every 8 hours of operation, how to check tire pressure, how to identify problems by sound. The engine will tell you when something's wrong, he'd say. Listen to it. A knock means bearings. A miss means ignition. Learn the sounds. He taught her planting, how to calibrate the planter, setting the seed spacing by adjusting the plates, how to set depth, 2 inches for corn in their soil, how to maintain proper speed, 4 miles per hour for consistent spacing, how to watch for skips in the rows. They planted the 1983 crop together, Tom on the 40-20, Margaret on the Super M, working in tandem. He taught her harvesting, how to adjust the combine cylinder speed based on moisture content, how to set the concaves, how to watch for loss. Grain being blown out the back meant the fan was set too high. They harvested together in October, Tom getting noticeably weaker by then, Margaret getting noticeably more confident. By November, Tom was in bad shape. The cancer was winning, had spread despite treatments. He'd lost 40 pounds, could barely eat, was in constant pain. But Margaret could farm, could drive every piece of equipment, could maintain it, could operate it safely and effectively. In 8 months, Tom had compressed 30 years of farming knowledge into intensive daily lessons. Tom Sullivan died on November 18, 1983, at home in his bed, with Margaret holding his hand. The funeral was on Friday, November 20th. A cold day, overcast, threatening snow. 200 people attended. Tom had been well liked. Saturday morning, David and Mark showed up at the farm. They'd spent Friday night at a hotel in Toledo, hadn't stayed at the farm, hadn't wanted to. They arrived at 9 a.m. with their plan already formulated. That's when the confrontation happened in the church parking lot. Margaret told them no, told them she was farming. They didn't believe her. Thought she was in shock, in denial, would come to her senses within a week. They went back to their cities. David called Sunday night from Des Moines. "Mom, we're worried about you. You're not thinking clearly. The grief is affecting your judgment. Just promise us you'll reconsider." "I've considered," Margaret said. "I'm farming." "You'll fail. Maybe. But it's my choice to make." Spring of 1984 came. March, April. Planting season approaching. The boys called weekly, asking if she was ready to sell yet, offering to come help pack up the farm. She told them no every time. The day after Tom died, Margaret had sat in the living room of their farmhouse, looking at a photograph on the mantel from 1970, the year they'd bought the farm. Tom standing in front of their brand new 320 acres, smiling, full of hope. Margaret made a decision that day. She would not let this farm go. Tom had built it. Tom had paid for it. Tom had taught her how to run it. She would farm it or die trying. In late April 1984, Margaret started planting. She was alone on the farm for the first time in her life. No Tom guiding her, no Tom working beside her, no Tom to call when something went wrong. Just Margaret, 62 years old, and 280 acres of ground that needed to be planted. She planted from dawn until dark for 3 straight weeks. Tom had always done it in 10 days. Margaret took 3 weeks working 12-hour days, but she got it done. Every acre planted, every row straight, every seed at proper depth and spacing. She came in exhausted every night, muscles aching, back hurting, but satisfied. David called in early May. "Mom, are you actually planting?" "Finished yesterday." Silence. Then, "You planted all 320 acres?" 280 in corn, 40 in beans." "Yes." More silence. "Who did you hire?" "Nobody. I did it myself." "That's impossible." "No, it's not. I just did it." David's voice got tight. "Mom, this is insane. You're going to hurt yourself. You're going to go broke. Please, just sell the equipment before you lose everything." "Goodbye, David." She hung up. She cultivated in June, going through the corn with the cultivator to kill weeds. Took her 2 weeks instead of Tom's 1 week, but she did it. Harvested in October. The combine was the hardest piece of equipment to operate. So many adjustments, so many things that could go wrong. But Tom had taught her well. Gross income for 1984, $73,000 from grain sales. After seed, fertilizer, fuel, maintenance, property taxes, insurance and other expenses, $54,000 net profit. Margaret's living expenses, just herself now, no Tom, were $18,000. She saved $36,000. David called in December to ask how she'd done. When she told him she'd netted $54,000, he accused her of lying. That's impossible. You can't make that kind of money. You're making it up to avoid admitting you're failing. I have the bank statements if you want to see them. I don't believe you. Then don't, but it's true. Mark called separately, had the same reaction. Both sons were convinced their mother was deluding herself, that she'd fail spectacularly within a year or two. Margaret farmed 1985, netted $61,000, farmed 1986, netted $48,000, prices were down, but she still made money. Farmed 1987, netted $52,000. By 1988, 5 years after Tom's death, Margaret Sullivan was one of the only women in Tama County farming solo at scale. People talked about her. Some admired her grit. Some thought she was stubborn to the point of foolishness. Some quietly expected her to fail eventually, thought it was only a matter of time before age or accident ended her farming career. The farm equipment dealers and suppliers didn't know what to make of her. When she'd walk into the implement dealer for parts, wearing her work clothes, the salesman would look past her, expecting to see a man. "Can I help you, ma'am? Are you picking up parts for your husband?" "I'm a widow," she'd say patiently. "I'm the farmer. I need hydraulic hoses for my Super M." They'd look skeptical, process the order slowly, sometimes ask if she was sure she knew what she needed. She'd stand there calmly, wait for them to realize she did in fact know exactly what she needed, watch them fumble through the transaction. She learned things Tom hadn't had time to teach her. Learned welding from a neighbor named Harold Peterson, who took pity on her one day when she was trying to repair a broken implement tongue. Harold showed her the basics, how to strike an arc, how to move the rod, how to lay a bead. She practiced on scrap metal for weeks until she could make decent welds. Learned how to rebuild carburetors from a service manual she ordered from International Harvester. When the Super M's carburetor started running rough in 1986, she took it apart on her kitchen table, cleaned every passage with carburetor cleaner and compressed air, replaced the gaskets and needle valve, reassembled it. It worked. Learned electrical systems through trial and error and a Haynes manual. When the 4020 had ignition problems in 1987, she traced the problem through the system methodically until she found a corroded connection, cleaned it, fixed it. The 1956 Farmall Super M that David and Mark had wanted to sell for $8,000 in November 1983 became Margaret's workhorse. She maintained it meticulously, changed oil every 100 hours religiously, greased every fitting every 8 hours of use. Fixed problems immediately when they arose, never let anything get worse through neglect. That tractor never let her down in 22 years. By 1990, 7 years after Tom's death, Margaret had saved $280,000 in her farm account. No debt, no major equipment purchases, just steady profit from farming conservatively and living modestly. The boys had stopped calling to suggest she sell. They'd been proven wrong comprehensively, and they knew it. In 1995, opportunity knocked. Foreclosed farmland came available next door. The farm crisis had hit late in some areas, and a neighbor named Bob Henderson had finally lost his 160 acres after 15 years of struggling with debt. The bank was selling it cheap, desperate to get it off their books. Margaret paid $700 per acre cash. Total purchase, $112,000. Now she had 480 acres. She was 74 years old. For the larger acreage, she hired help during planting and harvest. High school kids from town, farm kids looking for summer work. She paid them $8 per hour when minimum wage was $4.25. Treated them with respect, taught them proper technique, explained why things were done certain ways. Some of those kids learned more about real farming from Margaret in one summer than they learned from their own fathers who'd been doing it wrong for years. One of those kids was a boy named Jeremy Miller, 16 in 1996, whose father had lost their farm in 1989. Jeremy worked for Margaret every summer from 1996 to 2000, through high school and college summers. Years later, Jeremy would say that Margaret taught him that farming wasn't about having the newest equipment or the most land. It was about knowing your costs, managing your resources, and never taking on debt you couldn't service. Margaret farmed until spring of 2005, when she was 84 years old. 22 years of solo farming after Tom died. She woke up one morning in May, got out of bed, and realized she was too tired to keep going. Not sick, not injured, just tired. 22 years of 12-hour days had finally caught up with her. Her total savings by then, $890,000 in the bank, plus the 480 acres free and clear. She sold the land in June 2005 for $3,200 per acre. Total sale, $1,536,000. The equipment, the Super M, the 4020, the combine, all the implements went to auction. Brought another $45,000. Combined with her savings, Margaret had $2,126,000. Not bad for a woman her son said would fail within a year. She moved to a small house she bought in Toledo, Iowa. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, $87,000. Lived comfortably, traveled a little, spent time with grandchildren who'd finally started visiting now that there was no farm work to do. David and Mark both called after they heard about the farm sale, asked about their inheritance, asked when they could expect to receive their share. Margaret told them she was revising her will, would let them know. She had her lawyer draft a new will, left $50,000 to each son. The rest, over $2 million, was divided between agricultural education programs at Iowa State University, the local FFA chapter, and specific bequests to the young people who'd helped her farm over the years. Jeremy Miller, who'd worked for her through high school and had gone on to become a farmer himself, received $200,000. When Margaret died in her sleep in February 2019 at age 98, her sons were furious about the will. They contested it, claimed she'd been mentally incompetent, claimed she'd been unduly influenced. The case went to court. The judge reviewed the evidence, reviewed Margaret's meticulously kept financial records, showing she'd been sharp as a tack until the end, and threw out the contest. The will stood. At Margaret's funeral, Jeremy Miller, now a 50-year-old successful farmer with 640 acres of his own, gave one of the eulogies. "Margaret Sullivan taught me everything important I know about farming," Jeremy said to the packed church. "Not just the mechanics, though she taught me that too. She taught me that success in farming isn't about having the best equipment or the most land. It's about knowing your costs, living within your means, and never ever taking on debt you can't service." He paused, looked out at the crowd. Margaret's sons tried to sell her husband's equipment while she was at his funeral. They told her she'd fail, told her she was too old, too female, too ignorant to farm. She stopped them, farmed solo for 22 years, made over $2 million, and proved every single person who doubted her completely wrong. Jeremy's voice got quiet. The sons who tried to sell the equipment got $50,000 each from her estate. I got $200,000 because I spent 5 summers helping her farm, and she remembered. The rest went to education and farming programs. Margaret knew exactly what she was doing, right up until the end. That's who she was. The sons who tried to sell Dad's equipment while Mom was at the funeral got almost nothing. The woman they said would fail became a multi-millionaire and left her fortune to the people who'd actually helped her. That's the whole story. The story of how Margaret Sullivan went from a widow whose sons tried to sell her equipment to a multi-millionaire farmer deserves more detail. Because those 22 years she farmed alone weren't just about proving her sons wrong. They were about discovering who she was when nobody was watching, when nobody believed in her, when the only person she had to answer to was herself. The first year, 1984, was the hardest. Not mechanically. Tom had taught her well, but psychologically. Margaret would wake up at 5 a.m., make coffee, look at the empty chair across the kitchen table where Tom had sat for 43 years, and fight the urge to crawl back into bed and give up. But she didn't give up. She'd get dressed, walk out to the machine shed, fire up the Super M, and work until dark. The physical exhaustion helped. When you're so tired you can barely climb the porch steps, you don't have energy left for grief. Her neighbors watched that first year with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. A few offered to help. Harold Peterson, who later taught her welding, would stop by occasionally to check on her. "You doing okay, Margaret?" She'd say yes, she was fine, and Harold would nod and leave. He understood she needed to do this herself. Some neighbors were less kind. Margaret heard the talk at the grain elevator when she delivered her first load in October 1984. Two farmers whispering loud enough for her to hear, "Give her 1 more year, maybe 2. Then she'll sell. A woman can't handle this long term." Margaret said nothing, just got her grain weighed, got her check, drove home. But she remembered. She always remembered. The second year, 1985, was easier mechanically but introduced new challenges. The Super M's clutch started slipping in June. Tom had always handled mechanical repairs beyond basic maintenance. Margaret had never rebuilt a clutch. She could have called a mechanic, paid $400 to have it done. Instead, she got a service manual from the implement dealer, studied it for 3 days, then started the repair herself. It took her a full weekend working from dawn to dusk. The hardest part was splitting the tractor, disconnecting the engine from the transmission housing, which required supporting the weight with jacks and blocks while she worked. She got it apart, found the clutch disc worn down to nothing, ordered a new one for $87, installed it, reassembled everything. When she started the tractor Monday morning and the clutch engaged smoothly, she felt a satisfaction deeper than any she'd felt farming with Tom. This was hers. She'd done this. By the third year, 1986, Margaret had developed a rhythm. Spring planting, summer cultivation, fall harvest, winter equipment maintenance. She knew every field, every drainage pattern, every place where the soil changed texture. She knew the equipment intimately, every sound, every vibration, every quirk. The 1956 Super M became an extension of her body. She could tell by the sound of the engine if oil was low, could tell by the vibration if a tire was getting soft, could tell by the way it pulled if an implement wasn't adjusted right. 43 years of watching Tom farm, plus 3 years of doing it herself, had given her an education most farmers never got. Her sons visited twice in those first 5 years. David came once in 1985, stayed 2 hours, spent the whole time suggesting she lease the land and retire. Mark came once in 1987, also stayed 2 hours, also suggested she quit. Neither offered to help with anything. Neither expressed pride in what she'd accomplished. They just wanted her to stop embarrassing them by being a woman farmer. Margaret stopped inviting them. If they wanted to visit, they could call first. They rarely did. In 1988, a reporter from the Des Moines Register came to interview her for a story on women in agriculture. The reporter, a woman in her 30s named Susan Chen, spent a whole day following Margaret through her routine, planting corn, maintaining equipment, doing bookwork. "How did you learn all this?" Susan asked, watching Margaret adjust the planter. "My husband taught me before he died, knew I'd need to know. Do your sons help?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then, "My sons live in cities. They have their own lives. This is my life. The article ran in July 1988 with the headline, "Widow Farms Alone, Defies Expectations." It included a photo of Margaret on the Super M, looking competent and confident. The article mentioned that her sons had tried to sell her equipment the day of her husband's funeral, and that she'd refused. David called the next day, furious. "Why did you tell that reporter about us trying to sell the tractor? You made us look like villains." "I just told the truth," Margaret said. "You did try to sell it. You made us look bad. You made yourselves look bad. I just described what happened." David hung up. Didn't call again for 3 years. Through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Margaret became something of a local legend, the woman who farmed alone, the widow who told her sons no. Other women facing similar situations would call her, ask for advice. Could they farm alone? How did you learn? What if people said you'd fail? Margaret's advice was always the same. If you want to do it, do it. People will always tell you what you can't do. Don't listen to them. Listen to yourself. By 1995, when she bought the additional 160 acres, Margaret was 74 and still working harder than most men half her age. The high school kids she hired were amazed by her stamina. She'd work alongside them all day, then go home and do paperwork while they went home to rest. Jeremy Miller, who started working for her in 1996 at age 16, later described those summers as transformative. "My dad had lost our farm, and I thought farming was just a way to go broke. Margaret showed me it didn't have to be. She showed me the numbers, showed me how she made money every year, showed me that the problem wasn't farming, it was debt." Jeremy went to Iowa State, studied economics, came back summers to work for Margaret. She paid him more each year as his skills improved. By 2000, his last summer, she was paying him $12 an hour, and he was worth every penny. "You should farm," Margaret told him that last summer. "You understand it. You understand the numbers. You'd be good at it." "I don't have land," Jeremy said. "Can't afford to buy any." "Then rent some. Start small. Save your money. Buy land when you can, but only if you can pay cash. Never finance land. Never. That's what killed your father." Jeremy took her advice, started farming 80 rented acres in 2002, saved aggressively, bought his first 80 acres cash in 2007. By 2019, he owned 640 acres free and clear, all bought with cash accumulated from farming conservatively the way Margaret had taught him. In 2004, when Margaret was 83, she fell off the tractor, stepped wrong climbing down, twisted her ankle, fell hard, lay in the field for 20 minutes before she could stand up, limped to the house, iced the ankle, kept working the next day. That scared her. She was getting old, reflexes slowing, balance not what it used to be. If she fell and broke a hip out in the field, nobody would find her for hours, maybe days. It was time to think about stopping. She finished the 2004 harvest, then sat down with her accountant to look at the numbers. She had $890,000 in the bank. The 480 acres were worth maybe $3,500 per acre. If she sold, she'd walk away with $2.5 million, more money than she could spend in her remaining lifetime. In spring 2005, Margaret made the decision. She was 84. She'd farmed for 22 years alone. It was enough. Time to stop while she still could. She listed the land with a real estate agent in May. It sold in 6 weeks for $3,200 per acre to a young farmer named Mike Chen, who'd been renting ground nearby and wanted to expand. Mike paid cash. He'd been saving for 15 years. Margaret liked that about him. The equipment went to auction in July. The Super M, the tractor David and Mark had wanted to sell for $8,000 in 1983, sold for $14,500 in 2005. Collectors wanted it because of its condition. Margaret had maintained it so well for 22 years that it looked and ran like a tractor half its age. The buyer was a farmer from Missouri who planned to use it, not restore it. Margaret liked that too. She moved to Toledo in August, bought her little house, settled into retirement. She was not idle. She volunteered at the library. She helped with the County Historical Society. She attended Farm Bureau meetings and spoke whenever they asked her to, sharing her story with younger farmers. In 2010, she was invited to speak at an Iowa State Agricultural Conference about women in farming. She was 89 years old, stood at the podium in front of 400 people, and told her story without notes. "My husband died in 1983, she said. "My sons wanted to sell everything the day of his funeral. I said no. They told me I'd fail. They told me I was too old, too female, too ignorant. I farmed for 22 years, made over $2 million, proved them wrong." She paused, looked out at the crowd. "But this isn't a story about me versus my sons. It's a story about refusing to accept other people's limitations. My sons genuinely believed I couldn't farm. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were trying to protect me from what they saw as inevitable failure. But they were wrong because they didn't understand what I was capable of. Most people don't understand what they themselves are capable of until they try." The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Afterward, dozens of young farmers, men and women, came up to thank her for her example. Margaret died peacefully in her sleep on February 12, 2019, at age 98. She'd lived 15 years in retirement, longer than she'd expected, longer than Tom had lived after retirement. She'd seen grandchildren grow up and have children of their own. She'd watched farming change, watched farms get bigger, watched debt loads get enormous, watched young farmers struggle the way farmers had always struggled. The will reading happened 2 weeks after the funeral. David and Mark sat in the lawyer's office expecting to split $2.4 million. When the lawyer read that they were each receiving $50,000 and the rest was going elsewhere, David stood up so fast his chair fell over. "That's impossible! She was our mother! We're her sons! We're entitled to that money!" The lawyer, a woman named Patricia Morrison, who'd handled Margaret's affairs for 20 years, looked at David calmly. "Your mother was of sound mind when she revised her will in 2006. She left explicit instructions. You are receiving exactly what she wanted you to receive." "We'll contest this," Mark said. "She was senile. She didn't know what she was doing." Patricia pulled out a thick file. "I have documentation spanning 13 years showing your mother was mentally competent until the day she died. Financial records she kept herself. Letters she wrote, conversations she had with multiple witnesses. If you want to contest this will, go ahead. You'll lose, and you'll look petty doing it." They contested it anyway. The case went to probate court. The judge reviewed the evidence. Margaret's meticulous records, her documented conversations with Patricia and others about her estate planning, testimony from people who'd interacted with her regularly showing she was sharp until the end. The contest was dismissed. The will stood. David and Mark each received $50,000. Jeremy Miller received $200,000. 3 other young people who'd worked for Margaret over the years received $50,000 each. Iowa State's Agricultural Education Program received $500,000. The local FFA chapter received $250,000. Various farming charities and programs received the rest. The sons who'd tried to sell their mother's equipment while she was at their father's funeral received less than 5% of what they'd expected. The young farmer who treated her with respect and learned from her got 8 times what they got. Margaret had calculated it exactly. At Jeremy's farm, he framed the check Margaret had left him. Didn't cash it for a month because he wanted to look at it, to remember what it represented. Finally, he deposited it and used it to buy another 160 acres. Cash, of course, the way Margaret had taught him. He hung a photo of Margaret in his farm office right next to his desk where he could see it every day. The photo was from that 1988 Des Moines Register article showing Margaret on the Super M, looking confident and capable. Under it, Jeremy mounted a small plaque. Margaret Sullivan, 1921-2019. She said no when everyone expected yes. She farmed when everyone said she'd fail. She gave her fortune to those who helped her, not those who doubted her, an example for all of us. Her sons tried to sell Dad's equipment while Mom was at the funeral. She stopped them and farmed solo for 22 years, made over $2 million, left her fortune to the people who actually helped her, and gave her sons less than they would have gotten if they'd sold that tractor in 1983. Sometimes the best revenge is just being right.